So how you been?
Ha ha ha, man. These caffeine withdrawals have been absolutely brutal. I
Yeah.
mean, it has been a hellish ride for the last time I talked to you was the day after my first day of no caffeine. And
Okay.
those first few days were kind of weird. But it's funny because you think that the first few days would be the worst, but it actually kind of had to build up, and I guess that was maybe the
Mm,
caffeine in my system. Even though I
yeah.
didn't have a lot of caffeine in my system, I haven't been using the huge amounts that I used to. One cup of coffee in the morning, and that's it.
Yeah.
But anyway, it gradually built up, and then the worst, well, the two worst parts of it were one was just crippling fatigue, and then
Mm,
this just very black depression and anxiety.
mm,
And um, it seemed like the fatigue the last few days, it seemed like the fatigue had improved. I was able to get up and do things and actually felt like doing things to a limited extent. But I was just dealing with this really dark um, space emotionally, mentally. And then yesterday, out of nowhere, the crippling fatigue came back just in full after having been mostly gone for 2 or 3 days. And I mean, I could either sit in this chair, and then there were times where I got so tired I couldn't even sit up, and I would just
mm,
lay down.
yeah.
So yeah, it, and the interesting thing is that I was talking to Susanna yesterday,
Mm,
and was telling her because I couldn't wrap my head around this because I can't remember any of the times I've detoxed before. I have
yeah.
no
Okay.
recollection.
Wow.
I mean, not even to the point of just being able to have a vague recollection and know that it was bad or it was
Yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
which I guess, that's partly memory and partly the way the mind kind of protects us from unpleasant experiences. But
Yeah.
so I was really confused about what was going on. And oh, I lost my train of thought, which that's the other thing too, is I'm just not clear-headed. My memory is
Mm,
anything but sharp, and even things I normally can recall. Just like words or concepts. I know what it is I'm trying to get to, but I can't get it to cooperate. But anyway, I don't. What I was about to say a minute ago, I can't remember, but it's not anything terribly important. Yeah, it's just. Oh, I know what it was. It's that unlike the other times I've detoxed, I can recall this. Is that in the past that for the first few weeks there would be this internal battle of let's just go ahead and have caffeine. This
mm,
is unbearable. Let's just go ahead
yeah.
and have some caffeine. And there would be all of this bargaining going on. And
Yeah.
there's none of that. There's none of the bargaining. It's very clearly
Amazing.
understood, and it's something that there's a genuine desire for to not have any caffeine, to just get through this no matter how brutal it is and
Yep.
get to the other side. And that's really been um, really pretty amazing because, you know, the three times I've actually gotten off for a period of time, as well as all the times I tried to get off of caffeine, there was always bargaining and always this inner negotiating and push and pull and there's absolutely just none of that. I mean, zero. I mean, there have been
Yeah.
2 or 3 times where a thought will come up, just have some caffeine. This isn't worth it. We'll just and no, 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 and it goes away, and it doesn't
Yep.
turn into push and pull. And the only thing I can attribute that to is just the Fetter 4 or 5 work. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't have any other explanation, and I don't have a hard time accepting that explanation because, like I told you last time we talked, after we had that one conversation last fall where we talked about this and talked about the possible underlying causes, and we did some digging and we found something, and I probably have it in my journal, but I can't recall off the top of my head the particulars. I just know it had something to do with when I was a little kid not
Mm,
being heard, and not being heard um, being tied into not having any say, not having any
yeah.
choice.
Yeah.
And so the way you kind of explained it back to me was, well, if now you have something where you have say, it's your choice and you can decide what you want to do. I mean, we know how decision actually,
Yeah.
decision doesn't work the way it appears to. I mean, that much
No.
is undeniably clear to me. Even just in the last couple of weeks, I've had a couple of experiences where I thought I'd seen it clearly, and then something happened, and I was in the moment. Something in the mind remembered to look like, yeah, there was absolutely no decision. There wasn't even any awareness or forethought. That truly came seemingly out of nowhere.
That's
Uh,
amazing. Yeah.
so we know the truth about decision and decision making, but in this case, we'll just for shorthand, we'll just say that um, after seeing after doing some digging and seeing that or finding that aspect or that whatever the word is for it, that thing that came from childhood
Mm,
of being denied any say or choice or having a voice, that seemed to really be the linchpin to the whole thing, because I remember it was that was on a Friday as usual, and normally after we would meet, within an hour or two after that, I would either make a cup of coffee or get an energy drink. And I remember thinking about it because it was kind of a habit. And in thinking about it, they're just the thought didn't lead to the usual things that happen that lead to having caffeine. It wasn't there. And I thought, okay, well, let's see how long this lasts. And then the next day, and the next day, and then after a week, and then after 2 weeks, like, wow, this really is gone. And so that was
amazing.
where it began.
Yep.
And so now I really have a hard time seeing this as anything else other than an extension of all of the continued Fetter 4 and 5 work, even if it hasn't been as consistent or as deep as I felt like it needed to be. There has been some work there. And so I guess that was enough to um, kind of get this to a point where I could say enough's enough, no more caffeine, and
Yep.
actually be able to um, um, follow through on that intention.
That's wonderful. It the work really pays dividends, even if it's not, hours every day of dedicated practice to just that, just that particular fetter that you're working on. It, all of this, and this it's why we're always saying that it's not about just working on one particular fetter for one particular period and having that one collapse and then you move on. It's all holistic. It's all connected. So as much as you have insights in other parts of your life, that is changing how you're able to interact with these cravings and urges that come up at other parts of the day. And when you start to get some daylight between the impulse to have something and also the discomfort in the body that comes with not having the thing, and you get some
Mhm.
daylight between that and the identification of the one who is supposed to be, you know uh either indulging in the whatever the craved item is, or trying to get the body out of a state of discomfort. When you have some separation between those two, you start to realize this is just a biological happening that's going on. This is just an experience that you're going through. That, like, because what I hear from this, and hopefully I'm not just kind of projecting that onto it, but as you've been going through the withdrawals, there's no like identification with the one who is having the withdrawal symptoms, or the one who is going through something difficult in that regard, or I mean, like, obviously there's exhaustion, and there's brain fog and various types of discomfort, but in the past, when you were bargaining yourself out of that and just, well, okay, maybe I'll just have a little bit, it's because there's got to be real identification with the discomfort, that it's me who is suffering the discomfort right now. I will do something, whatever it is, pray to a deity, take a shot of, something, whatever it is, to get out of that moment of discomfort. And when you have that, like, awareness that that's not coming up, the body is still exhausted and suffering in some way. There's still discomfort there in some way. But the difference is that you're able to be with that without identifying entirely with whatever the body is going through. Do you know
Hmm.
what I mean?
Oh, I understand exactly what you mean. I'm just as I'm listening to you talk, I'm kind of trying to reflect um, without distracting myself or diverting
Yeah,
myself
yeah.
from what you're telling me. But so I'm kind of, very lightly reflecting, and I don't know if it's that there's a lack of well, I guess if we say there's a lack of identification with it, then that I would have an easier time saying yes to that because that's not a black and white. That's not a
Hmm.
there's zero identification. It's
No,
just
no,
there's lack of
less. Yeah,
identification.
yeah. There's more daylight
Um,
between the two. There's less
right.
identification than there was.
So yeah, I could say that. I mean, if someone were to say, well, it sounds like no identification at all, I
Yeah.
think I would have to challenge that. I don't think that's the case. And it's something that I can't say for sure. What I'm going to have to do is over the remaining days or weeks, however long this pans out, because every day is different. Yesterday I thought I was out of the woods with the fatigue and then got slammed with it, and still pretty tired today, which was part of why I was running behind.
Yeah.
But I'll have to pay attention and see if I can get a fix on something that will tell me that there is reduced identification with the process and the experience. Because you may be right.
I mean, some of it is like you can tell immediately. Just and the reason that I said that I'm what I'm hearing is probably that there's less identification there is because there's um, uh, less motivation to escape from the discomfort. Right?
Ah,
If you had the thought that yeah, okay, I should just have some caffeine, do whatever to get rid of it, you're at that point totally identified with the sensation of discomfort.
right.
Being able
Ah,
to have that, no, you know what, I'm tired, whatever, whatever discomfort is going on, but I'm not looking for the out for it means that there is some level of you might still be, in some way identifying as the one who is tired and the one who is uncomfortable, but there's less of that identification because you're not needing to completely change your state in order to be okay. You are able to be okay on some more fundamental level, even while the body is tired and foggy
huh.
and in pain.
Well, yeah. I mean, I would agree with you provisionally. When I say provisionally, I mean that I need to take some time to look at it
Yeah,
as
of
it's
course.
happening in the coming days. But I think you're right, and part of the reason for that is because the way I had been explaining it to myself here recently was that the caffeine just makes me feel so bad that
Mm,
it was, kind of the carrot and the stick sort of thing. But then I realized, that caffeine has made me feel really rotten for a very long time, for probably around 10 years. And in the last 10 years, I have either quit outright for, a year or 3 years, or uh, have tried to quit more times than I can even remember.
mm.
And the fact that it makes me feel bad, as well as the fact that it causes problems for the people who have to live with me, was never enough to ensure quitting it, leaving it behind, and not returning to it. And
Yeah,
this is clearly different. There is something very different happening now than has ever happened before because, everything I've told you already. I
yeah,
mean, I'm sure as bad as it's been, if there wasn't something that had changed, which the only explanation I have right now is what, that makes any sense is what you're telling me. And it makes sense in light of the work that's done.
yeah.
Then if it wasn't for that, I'm sure that um, with days like yesterday and some of the other days where I was just so tired that I couldn't drag myself out of a chair off the floor, I probably would have just caved in and gone and got some coffee.
Yeah.
So, but I say it the way I did though, because I really need to look at it for myself and see if I can um, get a sense of what that lack of it or that reduced or lack of identification looks and feels like.
Mm.
So I think it's wiser to look into my own experience and see what I
Yeah.
can find rather than just going, well, I trust Todd. I know he knows what
Yeah.
he's talking about. And
Don't
I
trust
do.
me.
I mean, I do
Yeah.
enough. I'm willing to look into it, but
Yeah.
obviously the wise thing to do is, check your own experience.
100%. Absolutely. Yeah. 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 And it might be. I mean, I guess theoretically, when you phrase it like that, it could be that you have that idea that, well, actually, I'm going to suffer from the caffeine anyway. But I still think probably if you really notice your experience, that you're going to notice that there is something, and I kind of wonder too about the words that we use. If when we use identification, it tends to have those very non-dual Buddhist spiritual kind of connotations. And I think in some ways we might tone it back and just say, like, there's more resilience to being with things the way that they are without needing to change them so that you feel better,
Hmm.
right? So the identification that I'm talking about maybe isn't so much specifically the no sense of I connected to anything way, but more that, like, do you need to change things to be okay? Because in that it's the fourth and fifth fetter level of identification, which is more subtle than like the first fetter selfie
Ah,
identification, but it's the identification where I need for things to be a certain way in order to be okay. I need for the body to be perky and alert and clear-headed and have no discernible feelings of, you know, tension or unease in it to be okay. And otherwise, I need to do something to fix that, whether it's drinking caffeine or getting drunk or running a marathon or whatever it is that, I feel like I need to do to make that better. It is still the identification with whatever current state the body is in and needing to change that to be okay in some way. Do you know what I'm saying?
yeah, I do. And I mean, it makes sense. I just, a couple of things stand out to me. One is that, going back to the very first thing you said about needing to be comfortable, that really takes me back to the fact that if things were the way that they have long, then that need to be comfortable really would have translated into getting caffeine.
Yeah.
So I still have to, and I've been more or less of this mind all along anyway. I did some writing about it in the last week or so, and this, something is different. Something has changed in a way that it hasn't been before. And when you were talking just now, the one thing I noticed was that it was still, in order to communicate that and explain that experience, um, being different, it still requires I statements.
Mm,
So there's still that I in there somewhere. And like you said,
sure.
it's not the same as it is with Fetter One.
Mhm.
It's more subtle, which makes sense. I hadn't considered that before, but there's still some sense of it having something to do with some kind of central agent in there.
Yeah.
And and that I don't have any problem with that. I mean, that makes sense to me. It's just a matter of looking for myself to see it in order to get a sense of what that looks and feels like. Because it hadn't occurred to me to look at it that way and to look for that
Mm,
in, in my actual day-to-day experience, because it might be something that's actually, even though it's subtle, it might be fairly easy to see. It just means you have to go and you have to kind of look. And it may take looking for a while. It may be something that you have to keep bringing your attention back to until eventually, you know, it becomes clear. So,
and what you might find, again, always do your always do your own exploration. But it's like the body is always going to have certain states that are triggered as being or flagged by the internal circuitry as being uncomfortable or uneasy, right? Because it's not it's not a personal choice by the this, egoic being who's in here that decides that a broken ankle feels painful. There is an immediate, when certain nerves get fired, the brain is set up to flag certain things as uncomfortable or dangerous for a reason, right? It's that whole
Right.
you recognize that your hand on a hot stove hurts, so you pull it away and you don't injure the body further. It's a flag to let you know that something needs to be done. I have a wolverine biting my ankle right now. I should get away from that. This isn't, it doesn't feel good. Let me escape. Whatever the thing is just an initial reaction by the body that flags certain experiences in the body as being problematic because they're dangerous to the health and well-being of the body. It's when we go beyond that that we start to get into the work that we do, right? So you can have that initial flag that goes off, and obviously if you're being bitten by an animal, flee. Don't
Right.
just indulge in the pain and then start to like experience the sensations as raw sensations and start to dig it. It's going to cause problems. Get away first. Then, so that's why like I'm always recommending for people, if you have chronic pain or if you have, an injury that you have already medically taken care of, and then you are just left with the residual pain for a while, work with that. But it's all of those things that are not acutely dangerous to the body, but that the body still continues flagging as dangerous or problematic when they're not. Still bringing your attention to it. You have a broken bone, but it's already been set. It's in a cast. There's nothing more that can be done with it, but the body is still sending out signals that this hurts. So
Mhm.
with that, you can then start to explore that discrepancy between, am I in pain or is there just sensation that's happening here? And can the attitude toward the sensation actually be completely different from that initial red flag that the body sends up that there is a distress and something that needs to be taken care of in an emergency?
Uh,
So even when you're tired, what I'm trying to point to is it's a more subtle thing, but being tired is not inherently a dangerous or problematic thing. But if the idea is that I have stuff to do, I would like to be perky, I just feel like I'm dragging all the time, all of that, the body sets up like this idea that it's daylight out, there are things to be done. This is an
mm,
abnormal state. It flags it as an abnormal state. There's a problem here. The initial signal might come out that there's a problem, that I'm tired or that their body is tired right now. But if instead that kind of wiser awareness or whatever we want to call it, that acknowledges the fact that, okay, the body is tired right now. It's not me. There's no identification with, I am the one who is tired right now, or I actually have this whole list of stuff I'm supposed to be doing, and this tiredness in the body is inconveniencing me in some way. Those are all the thoughts that are the identification that things need to be different from the way that they are. That's when you can find the identification popping up. But again, going like one level kind of deeper in that, what you will probably find, and again, please do the research yourself, dive in and experiment. But what you might find is that there is that initial state of discomfort flagging in the body, right? You're tired, you're cloudy, you're in some sort of physical tension or distress. And then there are thoughts that come up in response to it that are making an issue out of it. You will have thoughts that say, I have all this stuff to do, or yeah, whatever the explanation is or the objection is to how things are. Those pop up into the mind in response to those sensations. That resistance, that objection to the way things are, causes its own little extra constellation of sensations in the body, all sorts of other reactions that are happening. But fundamentally within that, you won't actually find just like in the first fetter, you won't find the actual agent who is identified. You will find a pattern of sensations in the body and reactive thoughts about those sensations. Reactive thinking that is constantly putting the present or painting the present as a problem. Thoughts that are habitually making this moment into something worse than it is, or saying that it needs to be different in some way. But and that can have, like I said, residual consequences in the body where you'll actually start to feel tension and bracing in the shoulders and the chest and other emotional states that arise. But that is just a habitual process that is going on. You won't find the actual I who is the one who is identified or the one who is upset about being tired or foggy or in pain. That is still just this extra thought layer added on. What you find is the actual state of the body in whatever its state it's in, and then thoughts arising about that state that are an objection to it, and then sensations in the body usually that are reflecting those thoughts. And that's basically what you get left with.
Hmm.
So the lack of identification or the lack of that, the fourth fetter, fifth fetter thing is when you have fewer of those thoughts that are pitting this moment against what is here.
Huh.
You have less of those needing to change things thoughts. There's this more acceptance or accepting thoughts that show up in response to whatever happens to be arising in the body or the external situation. I think it's maybe problematic of us to, and we have to use I and stuff all the time, but there's a problem inherent in it that we are constantly reifying some form of self within that when we do it. So recognizing that what you're actually looking at is this completely uh, automatic process of sensations in the body, instant flagging, by certain circuits in the brain that these states are for some reason dangerous to the health and well-being of the body, and then habitual thoughts that add on the whole second arrow issue,
Ah,
right? That's all those extra thoughts about it that are add on, and that's what it's pointing to. Again, it's not me who's stabbing me with that second arrow, but it's the habitual tendency of creating those second arrows of thought about it that are constantly making this moment into an issue for any number of reasons, and you know uh they're all subjective reasons. Anything that you can be experiencing as a problem, somebody else could be experiencing as a delight. We're all very different like that. So recognizing that you can't say anything about the moment that is objectively true. It's always got a subjective bias to it.
right. Well, um, some things you said made made me aware of a couple of things that at the very least are interesting, but they seem to point towards what you've been getting at all along.
Mm.
Because when I reflect back on the last couple of weeks, I can't think of a time when I've either said or written, because I've communicated a lot through text and email with Susanna,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying I haven't said it at all, but I think there's been very little of the um, uh, say a statement like I can't stand this, this is awful, or
Mm.
um, um, any kind of I statements, which I guess when I think about it, or when I start to talk about it, say it out loud, it seems like those statements or I statements really aren't necessary to communicate it. But it seems like typically when things are bad, over the course of my life, it's been, I can't stand this. Uh, I don't know how much of this I can take, things like that.
Oh
And
man.
there's been very little of that. It's just been, wow, this is really uncomfortable. This is really, I've described it as brutal to you and
Yeah.
others. And I've said that, but there hasn't been a lot of talking about in terms of myself.
Mm,
Um, and I don't even know that I've really been thinking about it that way. Um, Most of it has just been, instead of thinking about what's happening to this person, it's more been a case of what this experience is like.
mm,
And so it seems like perhaps there has been a somewhat subtle shift in the way I'm thinking about it,
yeah.
because
It's
it,
very
it really
possible.
hasn't felt. I mean, yeah, it's been pretty unpleasant. I mean, there have been
Yeah.
times
Yeah.
where, really it would like for this to be over, but
Yep.
um, I can't say that it has felt. I'm not saying it all at all, but I'm saying it doesn't seem like it's felt as personal as it typically would.
Mm.
It doesn't feel like it's about someone so much as it is just about what's actually happening in the moment. So,
Yeah, I know what you mean. There's always going to be, and it's where I'm, mm, I'm not like pushing for that radical non-dual purity of speech, and like I
yeah.
think it's yeah. I think there's always going to be some element there when we talk in colloquial terms about these things, right,
Hmm.
with other people, and we don't want to just do that non-dual zombie talk of, there's nobody experiencing nothing, and that's um but be aware in those any of the moments when like complaints or even seemingly factual statements about a situation come out, that there's always a sort of judgment involved in it.
Yes.
Even when we say that something is brutal or something is, difficult or uncomfortable or whatever, there is always a judgment that is, it seems factual, it might feel factual,
Yeah.
but it's coming from a particular viewpoint. Again, or somebody else can be going through the same thing, and based on their conditioning, they just experience it as absolutely wonderful. I've been looking for this my whole life, and here I am. Um, it depends entirely on where you are in any given moment as to how you experience it. So just being aware that we don't take anything as truth in that regard, that it's been brutal. The experience of it has been felt as being brutal in some way, but that that comes because the if given the option, Darrell would rather be at home with Susanna. And the brutal part is that the world is currently not aligning with what Darrell would like. That's
Right.
what makes it brutal, is because there's a subversion of expectation or desire that makes it something else. And it's brutal because there is a subtle resistance to that fact being what it is.
Hmm.
Do you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I do.
So
I just go ahead.
yeah, so it's just to be aware that anytime those words or thoughts come up, that we can, okay, step back. This is just a clue that I am holding some sort of idea about how this moment should be, how it I would prefer it to be, how it could be improved upon, that there is some internal resistance to the moment just because it's difficult because I'm fighting against it.
Right.
Um, if Sisyphus really loved repetitively pushing a rock up a hill, then there's no problem. It's not a torment, right? It's like, yes, again, I get to push it up again. Amazing. It's all there's no situation that is inherently awful. It's really our resistance to it, our, would like for it to be different than it is.
Yeah.
Um,
Although I do wonder, I mean, because when you're talking about um, judging the state of affairs where I'm separated from Susanna,
yeah,
uh, qualitatively, that is very different than the experience of um, going through, um, you know, unbelievably uncomfortable, depressive states, due to caffeine withdrawal. Um, because that sets off alarm bells. It kind of, you
yeah,
said something along these lines earlier. It sets off alarm bells because there's some part of the mind that's going, "Uh-oh, something's wrong here. There's a
yeah,
problem. This isn't normal," and
yeah.
then it all just kind of spins out from there.
But again, it's the depressive state itself, or whatever other manifestation, caffeine uh, um, withdrawal based manifestation is in that case the same as the separation or the same as the pushing the rock up the hill. Like, it's not the lack of caffeine that is the problem, it's the manifestation in the body that's now being judged as the problem. And so you have an initial flag that comes up that says this isn't the way it's supposed to be, there's something wrong here, but it's the response to that is where the second arrow comes in. The response to that is where there's a difference of perspective or judgment. That I believe that the body shouldn't be having uh, red flags going off that there's a depressive state in the body, or that there shouldn't be a depressive state in the body, or that there shouldn't be a withdrawal to the caffeine, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever it is, as uncomfortable as it might be initially from the mind, the brain literally saying that there's, something here that isn't the way it's supposed to be, from that moment that there's like some red flag or alarm bell going off, there can be an acceptance of the fact that there's an alarm bell going off. There could be an acceptance of the fact that there's a temporary state of depressive darkness or heaviness in the body right now that's being caused by the caffeine withdrawal. It's that whatever is here is what we're pitting ourselves against in some way, and it's just the automatic biologic reflexes of the body can just be one of those things. It's like it's no different. The dark depressive cycles that come with caffeine withdrawal are functionally no different from the sensations of having a broken bone or a torn ligament or some other, physical ailment that hurts. The body is saying that it's something wrong, and then you can sit and be okay with the alarm bells that are going off, with the sensations that are there. I know emotionally seems a bit different because we're talking about, depressive states and that sort of thing. But fundamentally, it's the resistance to it is the same. The Yeah.
All right, so are you saying it's the stimulus, not it's not the stimulus, it's the response? Is that what you're
Mhm.
trying to tell?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
I understand.
That was
I
a very short way of putting what I was getting at in a very overly convoluted long way. So thank you for that. But yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
now it all makes sense. I mean, I was understanding it, but before that, it seemed like there was something that wasn't quite clicking, and
Yeah,
then that
yeah.
I heard what you were saying in those terms, like, oh, okay, I
There you go.
understand.
Thank you.
So,
There you go. Yeah, it doesn't matter what the stimulus is that's causing it.
mhm,
Doesn't matter. It's all what we're looking at is the response to that stimulus.
I see.
And that's the part
Okay.
that, yeah. And that's fundamentally the same no matter what it is, because it's all that kind of meta awareness, objective viewpoint where we can see whatever is here with that state of equanimity that, okay, so like right now, this body is sweating. It is, you know, getting warm in this room.
Hmm.
There's okay, like the the habitual thing would be, quick jump up, crank up the air conditioning, or do
Right.
something to be, more comfortable immediately. But you can also just recognize, oh, this is what a body feels like when it's a little bit warm, when it's sweating a little bit to, it's perspiring to reduce the internal temperature of the body. Interesting. This is what it feels like. It's stepping. I know it's a very subtle, a much more subtle discomfort than other ones that we've been talking about, but it's just a gradient of the same process. So I think for everybody, it's really helpful to practice with more subtle discomforts so that you can
Mhm.
kind of build up those muscles of equanimity so that
Right.
the more strong the stimuli is, the more you have the ability to observe and sit with and accept without immediately jumping into the old reactive patterns.
Right. I see. Hmm. Well, hang on a second. Let me make sure. Check the. Yes, we have privacy.
Okay.
Um, this is going to seem divergent, but it it's comes back to that whole thing about the stimulus rather than the response. There have been things that have happened in the time I've been living here with the roommate I told you about.
Hmm.
And I realized in the last week or so that, to put it in more conventional terms and the way I've thought about it for a long time, is that um, some resentment has developed. And then on the meeting on Tuesday, I heard you and Pernilla saying something about, um, always acting with kindness and compassion.
Mm.
And I realized, this is not a state that needs to be allowed to persist because I'm not acting on it. All I'm doing is I just keep a very, very, a very carefully guarded arm's length
Hmm.
with this person
Yeah.
because it's not been anything major. It's just been the thing that really kind of finally tore it for me. There have been some other things, but just to kind of give you an idea of what we're talking about, um, this person is. I've met people who are completely sports obsessed.
Mm.
This is beyond the usual degree of obsession with sports,
Yeah.
and the whole World Cup thing was going on, which I didn't even know was happening, and they wanted someone to talk about it. Nicole had already made it clear that she didn't want to talk about it, and so I was the only one left around. And I'd already told this person early on that it's not something I care to discuss. I don't want to have conversations about sports,
Yep.
because what that means is you get corralled into something that goes on sometimes forever. And it's like, okay, well, this is fine. I'm glad you feel this way. I don't have any interest, so I can stand here and listen to you until you decide you're done, or I might have things that I need to do. And so I made it clear that I didn't want to talk about it, and they kept trying to find ways to make it
Mm.
okay and make it acceptable and kind of twist it, manipulate it into, and trying to find ways to convince me and coerce me. And um, and finally, I just had to just put my foot down and say, no, no, I don't know how many times, I don't know how many ways to say it. No, I've made this clear before, and that nothing has changed. and you can't seem to respect that. So anyway, since then I've been keeping a very, like I said, carefully guarded arm's length, because it's that way about most things.
Mm.
You've gotten corralled into conversations or really monologues about stuff that I don't even need to know this. It's not even any, I mean, it's not even that I'm not interested. This has, there's no reason I need to be hearing this. You pick the wrong person, I think. But when I recognized that there was some resentment, and thinking about what you and Pernilla had said on the meeting on Tuesday, I thought, I always think about it in terms of resentment. And I don't know if you and I have ever talked about this specifically before, but what occurred to me was bringing this up with you because I was pretty certain that you would have a different way of framing this, or a way of reframing it that might be more practical and
Mm.
useful. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the way I've handled resentment, because it's a process I've got I've got a great deal of experience with it, to the point that when I recognize it's happening, I can usually address it and do something about it and get it sorted out in pretty short order.
Mhm.
But and there's nothing wrong with that. But the way that we've talked about doing things, the way we've talked about understanding things, really is more practical, and also tends to get underneath things, get to something deeper, and it tends to be more effective in the long term. But when you were describing what you were describing, just recently, and I said, okay, so it's not about the stimulus, it's about the
Mm.
response. Immediately, I thought, okay, so even though normally people would say that the event was stimulus, and that's true, it actually seems like the the that feeling of resentment, which, that would be a question of, well, is there really a resentment there? Are you sure?
Mhm.
But it even seems like that feeling of resentment could be considered the stimulus, and it seems like the response is something else. And what that something else is really isn't clear.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So resentment is kind of a funny one too, because you have so many things have to go into the story about you and another person, or you and a situation, in order to create that sense of resentment.
Right.
You can't really get it from a, one-time encounter with somebody. There's generally some uh build up of that
Hmm.
person should have acted differently than they did. They routinely do this thing that bothers me, right? There's like a habitual pattern in our creation of resentment that, first of all, there's an expectation here which they are supposed to have met.
Ah, yes.
So resentment, I mean, it's always obviously coming from the inside, but it's interesting to find out why exactly, or what is building up that resentment on the inside. So when you have resentment, there is always some sort of expectation that you have that somebody else is supposed to have met, even though you probably haven't actually explicitly identified that. Sometimes we have, and sometimes the other people just ignore it, which is possible. But a lot of times when we resent somebody for something, we haven't really made it clear. It's like, we expect them to just understand what they're doing wrong, and then we, hold it against them when they haven't picked up on the clues. So be aware if you ever find yourself doing that. But it's recognizing that I have made up a story about that person. I have created a set of expectations that they need to fulfill, or they should have fulfilled. And then I'm going to keep rehearsing this story about all of the times that they have failed on coming through for whatever it is. And then I am going to feel justified in my resentment, my disgust of them, my anger at them, my whatever residual emotion comes up with that creates this kind of messy stew of resentment towards this other person. But you're never seeing them in the moment where they currently are. right? You're always dragging behind all of those past escapades, all of the times that you've had these interactions with them. It's all being, they carry that weight on their shoulders every time they see you. So you're already coloring your present experience with all
Mm,
of the memories of all of their past failures in your eyes.
right.
So when you feel resentment towards someone, it's always a good idea to look, turn around and look inside. How are you creating the situation so that you feel justified in your resentment of them? What have they done wrong in your eyes? Also, for our self growth and development, that's also a really good time to start to question, okay, so since that bothers me so much, in what way am I doing that exact same thing to them or other people? Because you're usually
Mm,
going to find that you are actually the perpetrator in some way with something that is upsetting you about that, you know. And I don't know if this is specifically it, but like if you routinely get upset about her monologuing about things that you're not interested in, just check in your life. Are there other times when you have that same kind of behavior or something where you are, um, you know, being really passionate about something that you're really into with somebody who's maybe not quite as passionate about it. They're not sharing it, but you still feel that, enjoyment about talking about it and wanting to connect with somebody about it, even if they aren't completely on the same page as you. Notice if that's part of your repertoire as well. And the
right.
thing is, where I think it's also important, just before I forget, with this sort of situation, it's that fine line, everybody kind of has to find this for themselves. But we've talked about this a long time ago. I think that for me, I think the kind of working definition that I use for it, because we tend not to talk about this a lot. When we talk about boundaries and how to define a boundary and all of that, it really is, it's great to have healthy boundaries and to be able to set them, but you need to know the difference for you between what is like a healthy psychological boundary and what is just a preference. And my kind of
Hmm.
go-to easy check-in for that is, does if I were to do this thing, would I be in some way physically, psychologically, or emotionally injuring myself to do that? Is this situation physically, psychologically, emotionally injurious to me to be in it? If
Yeah.
no, then it's just a preference. If it's not, if having somebody monologue to you about the World Cup is causing you physical pain or just, injury or like real deep psychological trauma or emotional trauma or something,
Mhm.
then yeah, it's reasonable to get out of it. If it's not, then it's just a preference. I would rather not be talked to for an hour about something I'm not interested in, and I would rather be doing something else. And that's where we can start to kind of at least be aware of how much it is that we are willing to put ourselves out for in somewhat discomforting ways for the perceived good of others,
Mhm.
and where the limit is for me, and it's different for everybody. um some people are just like totally open to everybody can just talk to them, and like, you know, somebody wants to lecture that person on cats for 3 hours, and they'll just sit there happily listening for 3 hours. And maybe for them, they're just really humoring the people and being kind. Maybe they're finding something, enjoyable in that experience. Or maybe they're actually really sitting there like, and they have major boundary issues, and they are consistently pushing past their own boundaries because they just find it absolutely impossible to say no to somebody or be perceived in any way as unkind toward them. That same activity of just sitting there for 3 hours listening to somebody talk about cats is completely different depending on what their internal state is. So we can't judge it from the outside. It's something that you have to find for yourself. But I put that out as kind of a test because I think a lot of times we all default to thinking something is more injurious or more pushing a boundary than it often is when it comes to just, you know, uh, being in positions that are like maybe a little bit socially uncomfortable or a little bit, going out of our way to spend a little extra portion of our life listening to somebody talk about something that we're not particularly interested in. So something to be aware of.
Yeah, and there are things there that are new information for me. It's just it's one thing to make time for somebody and listen to them, and I actually in my thinking about this, I actually kind of crossed that territory a little bit because I thought about that very thing about making time for someone to be listened to. But it's tricky, and I know this from experience because I used to have somebody I lived with who was like that. And it's one thing to make a little bit of time, but when you make time for someone who doesn't know when to stop, and they truly don't, I mean, it just, you know, and the problem is how much is enough? Well, if you figure out where enough is, getting them to respect that, okay, look, I have something I would like to do. I have something I was going to get to, and you can't get them to stop, you know?
Well, it is where, uh, and again, because I think with so much of this, we have to kind of develop our own tactics and skills. But
Yeah,
to, and again, I don't know the person, so I don't know the exact correct way of doing this, but just putting out as a possibility, you still retain the power, so to speak, to stand up and walk away, right? To
yeah,
like a lot of us have that where I won't engage because I will feel uncomfortable disengaging. It's
yeah,
worse to start to engage and then say, "Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm really I have other things to do. We'll pick this up another time or whatever, or I'm sorry, I can't listen any longer." That seems more uncomfortable to us to say, "Okay, enough," in a situation than it is just to say no outright or just, completely avoid the people. And so then it's interesting for you to find out why it's difficult to disengage.
mm,
Why is it difficult at that point to say, okay, I've had enough. I actually have other things that I need to do now, and I'm going to go take care of that. But we'll pick up this another time. So that becomes a new facet that you can look at from
yeah,
your own level. All of these things, all of these interactions with, quote unquote, difficult people or people that try us in some way are really good. Um, I think, the terms like spiritual friends or helpful friends in Buddhism,
yeah,
that they are the ones pointing back to something interesting that we can discover about ourselves.
yeah. And I've actually had a little bit of, excuse me, I've had a little bit of that already. There have been a couple of places where it's a matter of interacting and um, having feelings of annoyance or irritation, and then it finally hit me one day. Hold on a minute. If I'm having the experience of being annoyed or irritated, what's underneath that? So there have been
Exactly.
two or three times where um, uh, I actually had to kind of go digging, and fortunately had the presence of mind to actually write it down too.
Oh,
So
excellent.
because sometimes this stuff sticks, and other times you'll remember. At least this is my experience. I'll remember some of it, but I don't really remember it with enough clarity for it to be meaningful. And so if I write it down, first of all,
Yeah.
that helps to drill it in a little bit more, but I can also go back and refer to it
Yeah.
because it with stuff like that, I think it's important to make sure it doesn't get lost.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful. And there's so much. I mean, when we're bringing these sorts of things into our daily life, there's so many opportunities to uncover things and to have these discoveries that they can be plentiful. It's hard to keep track of everything in the mind because it's, there's so much going on all the time when we're really aware.
Well, somebody in Perfectly Okay, I think it was Lisa Martin. I hope
Hmm.
she doesn't mind me mentioning her by name. Probably not. Um, I think it was her that said, wherever you, man, I'm losing my voice. Wherever you're reactive is where you're not awake.
Yeah,
And that
yeah,
always stuck with me.
really good.
And I still, that still comes up, that I'm reminded of that
Yeah,
on a somewhat regular basis. Now, doing something with it is another matter, and that's been something that in the last couple of months has, um, I've tried to. There's been the desire to make that more conscious rather
mhm,
than just having a reaction to something and dealing with it however it's dealt with in the moment and then forgetting about it, because that, it's such a long-standing habit. It's easy to just do that and not even realize you've done it.
yeah, yeah. And this really what we're doing is changing those habitual patterns. And it's a long process. It's not an overnight thing. It's decades of this being the pattern of thinking that this particular biological organism defaults to. And we're changing that bit by bit. Seeing things in a new light gives you a new opportunity that, okay, now you're going to, the thoughts about it are going to be different. But it takes a long time. We have lots of different aspects of our lives that have completely, built-in automated responses to them. And some of them are healthy, but many of them are not. A lot of them are not the best that we could possibly be. So it takes time.
Or even if they're even if they're more to the neutral side of things, still like what I just mentioned a minute ago, having a reaction to something, kind of addressing it in the moment and then forgetting about it and moving on,
Mm.
that's not necessarily harmful, but it's not helpful either.
No, no, no. Well, it depends. I mean,
Well,
we don't know subconsciously what's happening though. There can be
right.
a lot that's happening under the surface where just having something in conscious memory isn't necessarily absolutely important for everything to click. A lot happens under the surface. A lot happens when we're sleeping. And then, you just wake up with a different perspective on something. You have no idea. It wasn't because you consciously held something in mind the whole time that you were asleep. These things are happening. And it's again where there's some benefit to it, but we don't know. I mean, like just personal example. Um, I'm practicing Spanish, every day
Oh, that's
because,
right. Yeah.
right, need that. And what's interesting is, practicing like the different past tenses. Actually, a good use of AI that I found is having discussions with Chat GPT with the voice mode in
Mhm.
Spanish. So I have it give me
Yeah.
English sentences and I respond in Spanish, or we just go back and forth in Spanish or that sort of thing. And it's really, really good, really super, super helpful. Um, but like there's like I don't even know how to describe this. When I was working on some of the past tenses, there are patterns, when you're doing conjugations of verbs that you learn. And there's like an internal image slash feeling of having understood this pattern. And when we were doing drills of different sentences in like the imperfect tense over and over again, you get used to using certain patterns over and over again. And you start to feel this kind of internal confidence about it. And then I had a day where I was really tired and I just didn't do any of that stuff for the day. I thought I'd just give the brain a chance to rest. And then the next day I started up again and it was asking me some of those and I had like no clue, no internal feeling of like pattern recognition or confidence at all that like I had any idea how to answer correctly. And I was saying sentences that I thought I was like, okay, that's got to be completely wrong. And they were correct because I
Huh.
had internalized some of those patterns subconsciously, while the next day, while I was sleeping, whatever. And even though that external, you know, whatever conscious awareness, whatever, wasn't really sure at all. And there was no feeling of confidence about it. There was no like, I still don't even know how to really call that, but there's like that sort of like pattern visualization or whatever. None of that was there. I was not at all confident that I was using the right tense for the right, the right conjugation for the right tense. I was doing it correctly because the subconscious part learned and remembered. So that's why I say like we tend to overvalue a lot of times the use of the conscious mind in the processes. It's got its,
Mhm.
it's not that it's in never valuable or that we shouldn't use it and we shouldn't write things down. We absolutely should, but it's not the only thing. There's a lot, 90 some percent of the processing is done subconsciously where we are completely unaware of it. So
Right.
just to say, yes, absolutely write stuff down and use it, but so much is happening under the hood that there's no guarantee that it wouldn't happen without doing that. So it's not that it's not good to have a realization and then forget it. You don't know what is happening with that forgotten realization that could be causing so many more ripples than the one that you've, remembered and held on to and cherished. We just don't know.
Well, what I was referring to was that if something comes up and we're reactive, there's some kind of reaction, and instead of taking the time to look into it, we just kind of gloss it over and then go on about our
Mm.
business. That's not very helpful in
No.
terms of long-term trying to change patterns of behavior and thinking, you
Sorry. Yeah,
know.
that's absolutely true. Yeah, I misunderstood what you were going for with that one. Sorry. Yeah, that's
That's all right.
absolutely true.
I
Yeah.
just want to make sure that was not left
Gotcha.
misunderstood, in, um, suddenly my verbal centers aren't working. In
Yeah.
case somebody
Yeah.
watching this
Yeah.
was confused by, was not following or thinking that there was some kind of disconnect. So anyway, um, but that's interesting about the
Thanks, Darrell.
Spanish.
Yeah, yeah, it's been a really fascinating thing practicing mostly daily. And
I don't know if I've
it-
ever had that happen where one day I'm doing something and then I take a day off and I come back to it, and then suddenly there's this ingrained um, comprehension. I mean, maybe it has. Maybe when I was really actively studying music when I was in my late teens and 20s. I don't know, but I can't recall ever having had an experience like that.
I feel like I've had that a lot actually with playing music. It's been less factual and more performance based. So like you know, really practicing a new song or a piece or whatever that I couldn't quite get down or I was struggling with, and then you take a day off or whatever, and then I can play it. Like the next day, it's like
Huh.
something. So I remember that from, especially those days of like playing classical pieces or things that were more tricky, that like really struggling, and then something processes while I'm sleeping or the next day or whatever, and then all of a sudden it's yeah, like a little boost in an ability.
Well, I mean, maybe it's there and I just don't remember it, but
Yeah.
I don't have any conscious recollection of that sort of thing. So, trying to debate whether or not I feel like there's enough privacy to go back to that other.
Mm.
I'll give it a whirl, but I think it's safe. I think I know how to go about
Okay.
this. So
Okay.
let's sum that up if you don't mind when you're
Sure.
when it comes to that question of dealing with a resentment without being too specific as to the circumstances, more about the process that you described just a minute ago, because
Yeah.
that I heard everything you said, but it's if I try to bring that down to a process, something to remember to use, I wouldn't have it.
I get that. So it's because there are lots of different ways that you can use this.
Okay.
Or I should say, like, there's a lot of different things that you can discover when you have a resentment towards someone. So the first thing is notice how much you're actually seeing the person as they are now and how much you are weighing them down by all of the past stories that you've put upon them. You're defining that person right now by your projection, your memories about all of the ways that you have experienced them to you in the past. So you can question the veracity right then of how accurate is that, how accurate are my feelings towards this person now based on that. When you can take a moment to recognize the unreality of those stories in general, that
Hmm.
they are just thought stuff right now, and they were very, very subjective thought stuff back when they first occurred.
I'm with you.
You can question, what expectations do you have for the other person that they aren't seemingly fulfilling?
Ah, yeah, that's right. Okay.
You can also turn it around and do the investigation for yourself to find out all the ways in which you aren't fulfilling those expectations for you or for somebody else, or are behaving in an analogous way.
Okay. Hmm.
There's also um the whole boundary versus preference side of it.
Ah, yes. Okay. I'm glad you mentioned that. I had completely lost that.
I mean, I'm reminded of, like, years ago when we were talking about you unloading the dishwasher and the resentment of being the one who, has to unload the dishwasher over and over again. And it's like, there are expectations built in that, there are stories built in that, there's um the question of, do you just prefer not to unload the dishwasher, or would you prefer somebody else to do it, or is it like physically injurious that, I have back damage, and every time I do it I'm literally, like, lying in bed for 3 hours afterwards recuperating from unloading the dishwasher. That's a different scenario then, right? So it's all of those
Hmm.
things that you can investigate for each one of these situations. And it's that, it's the hardest one to kind of point to. It's sort of related to the earlier one with it just being thought stuff, but to really acknowledge that the entire dynamic between you and everybody else is happening in your mind.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
That
I do tend to overlook that.
Yeah, and it's like, it's subtle, but it's so important that the entire relationship, the entire interaction is mind generated. It's self created.
Hmm. Now, I hear you say that, and I understand what you're saying, and I mean it's something I have long since wrapped my head around. Um, Even just in the time that we've been talking, um, you know, from our earliest sessions up until now. But trying to think of how to ask this.
Mhm.
Um, maybe this is a good way to approach it. When you say that recognizing that the entire dynamic between ourself and others is
Mhm.
mind created, how do you recognize that? How do you apply that so that it makes a difference in the moment when interacting with or dealing with other people?
Yeah, it's a super good question. And well, how it makes a difference is because you start to recognize that you don't need to play out those old habitual routines with people because they are only your own fabrication.
Right.
So being aware that like all of those other things that we've just talked about help keep pointing you to the fact that the objective reality of this situation between you and any other person is not going to be the same as how you perceive it. So constantly being aware of your own filters, of your own coloration of the experience, of your
Mhm.
creation of it as it is, keeps like devaluing your certainty in your position, or the certain devalues the certainty that you have in the rightness of your perception of that relationship. We often try to turn to other people to validate our experience, and sometimes they do and
Yeah.
sometimes they don't, but just recognizing again and again that the your perception of another person doing anything that they do is based entirely on your conditions, on your conditioning, on your filtering of what you hear, what you see, how you think that they are responding to you, whether they are, you know, if you ask somebody not to do something and it seems like they're still doing it, you are then assuming that they are perceiving you in a certain way, as your needs are not as valuable, or they don't hear you, or whatever. You're projecting on them what their experience is. The whole dynamic in both directions is being filled in by you in that moment. They're doing the same to you from the other side. So, the irony is nobody is really seeing the other person exactly as they are or seeing the relationship as they actually are. But all we can do is work with our own bubble.
So, man, I'm really having a hard time with my voice here.
Okay.
When when it comes to applying that in the moment, when it comes to being able to actually see that so that it's meaningful, so that it can change
Yeah.
how we're interacting with a person or behaving in a certain situation. Um, I heard some of what you said, but it seems unclear in turn for me. How do I take the idea that and recognizing the idea that everything that's happening between me and another person, or me and other people, or me in a situation, is all mind created.
Hmm.
Um, for example, um, is it a good strategy to um, start seeing what kind of thoughts are actually
Yep.
coming up in the moment?
Absolutely. Noticing that it's one of those things that I maybe don't define enough or describe enough, because I think it's probably different for everybody and how it's perceived. So for me, I would say 'cause I tend to be a very visual thinker.
Mhm.
So the the experience of it is really recognizing again, it sort of comes up as like a visual thought. This recognition of the it's one of those really difficult things to take out of the mind, and it's like that subjective feeling of a dream that you're trying to like explain to
Yeah,
somebody else. It
I
really
understand.
really hard to do that. It's sort of like the internal knowing that we talk about a lot of times, that people get that just like you just take for granted that how something is. It can be something like that, where it's this level of just awareness. And again, it might have and this is why I'm really struggling with this, because I think the visual representations that show up in my mind are not really the thing or the
Ah,
understanding. They are just sort of an adjacent visual representation that shows up. It's like
I see.
taking a situation of like the four-dimensional dynamics of being with a person and just kind of like, bringing it to like a two-dimensional image. It just like sort of flattens everything down. It's like, this is how stark and simple it is. This is your projection of this entire situation, but that doesn't really convey anything, which makes it very difficult to.
I think I may know how to.
do,
I think I
do,
may know what you're trying to get at. Let me see if this makes it easier for you.
thank
You
you.
said something to me then in the last 6 months or so, and it really stuck with me. It's something that I remember fairly frequently, and it has actually helped with this kind of thing now that I think about it, although not enough because it's something that needs to be made use of more. Anyway, point is you
Yeah.
had said to me, um, trying to remember to take my own interpretations of reality lightly.
Yeah. Yeah.
That may not be exact word
That's
for word
great.
quote, but it's
Yeah.
darn
Yeah.
close.
Yeah. That's great.
It does
Yeah.
is that it, calling that
Yeah.
idea to mind?
That was a really funny little sixth federy thing. So you're on the computer screen here, and there's a window behind you, and a mail delivery, car thing just went by, and you turned your head to look behind you in the direction that the car was just going behind you. So it was like, I hear, I mean, in my world, there was, so you turned around, and in my world, the car was going behind you, and it was like you were turning to look behind you out the window at the car that's going.
You
Really,
mean
really funny.
a delivery truck in your neighborhood?
Yeah, 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 yeah. So
Okay, I
just
see
drove
now.
by, and you turned around in time to like, match like you were looking at the car going outside of my window behind, and that was funny.
That's funny.
Sorry.
That's
But
okay.
yeah, do not, so take all of your interpretations lightly of what you experience. It's
Yeah,
another
no
good.
kidding, huh?
Yeah.
Hang on, I'm going to do
But
one thing real quick. I'm starting to
yeah.
notice weird audio artifacts, and
Okay.
I'm pretty sure I know what's causing it. Let me see. So things may behave strangely here for just a second.
Okay.
Okay, well, are you hearing me okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Still okay.
All
Hasn't done
right.
anything weird yet.
Okay. Did something a little weird on my end, but I guess it makes sense it wouldn't show up on your computer.
Cool.
Anyway,
So yeah, to answer your question, I think a lot of these are, what I'm pointing to is that it's less conscious and more, the more we're doing these things, the more we're breaking down our certainty in my perception being the correct one or being accurate, the more you have that kind of um like humility in the way that you interact with other people or any other situation, because you really fundamentally understand that you don't know what the actual situation is like, and you are just fabricating your, your mind is creating its best guess of everything. And so we
right.
have to have humility towards it, because we really don't understand the full scope of anything, no less just the, interpersonal dynamics of two people.
Well, you're going to love this question then. And I'll already have some little things here and there that I think help with this, but in a more fine-tuned or more specific kind of way, how do you suggest a person goes about really drilling that in to get that humility and to get that? I think the way you put it once was skeptic or no agnosticism about your own beliefs as
Yeah.
well as your own interpretation of the world.
Yeah. It's really all the practices that we're doing is to kind of undermine our certainty. It's not
Okay.
just one thing. It's really seeing, and that's why also we do a lot of the sixth fetter stuff, because that
Mhm.
really goes to, reinforcing that sense that you are living in a virtual reality of your own making, or the brain's own making. And that alone takes so much of the conviction out of it. And, my belief in that I'm really seeing the world as it is. Becoming, I think, one of the best things for me that was Sorry, I gotta sneeze. One of the best things was um, really being aware of all the glitches in the matrix, so to speak. And not in the like, woo-woo way that a lot of people have, there's
Yeah,
lots of glitches in the matrix posts on Facebook and stuff, but I mean
right.
like in your personal experience, how many times do you see something that you think is one thing and realize that like suddenly snaps into being
Uh,
something else? All
yes.
like there are so many little optical illusions that happen and auditory illusions and sense illusions that we just kind of write off and it's like, oh, it was just, it's just a funny little thing, right? Take that to heart. Recognize that that is not an isolated incident. we
Right.
are we have limitations in our processing, and the only thing that you can see is that limited processing output. Like you can't. It's not that you were like, you had a momentary hallucination where you thought that the garbage can on the side of the street was somebody bending over. You literally, your creation of what that, like, your experience of what that seemed to be, first a person bending over and then a garbage can, was the same experience. One wasn't a hallucination and the other one is real. It's
Uh,
all the same screen showing different things. It's letting those sorts of things really settle in and understand that, the memory that I have of something that I was so certain of actually is not true at all, or at least barely, barely has any resemblance to what really existed. And we talked about this in the last Tuesday group, but like we've been going through old home video footage or old home videos that I
yeah.
found as
I
we're
remember
cleaning up.
Camilla talking about that.
Yeah, and it's baffling that I do not remember my grandmother's voice sounding like that at all. It's
Uh-huh.
complete. I would never pick it out of a lineup of that being my grandmother. And I mean, she lived until I was in my, I want to say almost 30, maybe 30s. Something like that. So it's not like, it was like, she died when I was 6 or something. Like there's a large part of my life. She lived down the street. We were in constant contact.
Hmm.
We did everything. It was like, do not remember that that's her voice, what her voice sounded like at all. I've completely changed that. The dynamics of people and everything is completely different. The way that I sounded, my voice on that is completely different than I remember it being. The there was an accent, like I heard my mother's voice. And again, my mom died 5 years ago now, and there was a sound of her voice on older recordings. It was like she had like an almost New York accent that I do not remember hearing anybody. And many parts, people in my family had this accent that I do not remember any of them having. And it's
Wow.
like really trippy because it's like I have completely refabricated based on the past couple years of memories, their entire life before then, and the way that they sounded and behaved and everything. And it's so inaccurate. So instead of just writing those little things off as these little anomalies, recognize that that's the rule. It's not the exception. That is how our experience is all the time. There is very little to trust in our the way that we perceive the world and those in it. So it's all of that that's helping to constantly keep us questioning the validity and everything. And it also brings me back to like when we were talking about resentment and turning things around and seeing in what way am I actually doing the thing that I'm resenting the other person for and all of that. Also, one thing I forgot to mention that is that if you're holding on to a resentment of somebody, notice like what is that resentment doing for you, or what would you give up by what would you lose by giving it up?
Nothing I mean, I wouldn't lose anything. Uh, see if I can get my brain to cooperate. I wouldn't be losing anything positive. Anything that was lost, if we want to use that word,
Mm.
would be something that would be generally categorized as neutral to negative. You know,
Often, but double check.
okay.
Take your time to really look into it
Oh,
and feel into it
uh,
because there might actually be something that it seems to be providing you that it feels risky to lose.
Yeah, I see what you mean because there's this sense of, okay, so you've done X, and so I'm keeping you at arm's length.
Hmm.
And that's kind of a self-protection mechanism because I don't want to get railroaded by somebody who has no regard for my my preferences, desires, my ability to be able to act and move freely because you've got me nailed down here while you go on this monologue that goes on for 20, 30 minutes or whatever.
So
Um,
you
so it is kind
feel
of a self-protection.
exactly. Yeah, it feels uncomfortable for you. And also it keeps you if you have that resentment that keeps the person at arm's length, you also don't have to deal with the discomfort that we talked about disengaging or setting your own boundaries at some other point during the conversation. Yeah, there can be lots of other things too. So really
Yeah.
taking time to investigate, like, okay, like picture you're talking to the person and you're like, you know what? I am completely letting go of this resentment. I'm going to meet them completely from scratch for the first time. And then they go on and talk to me about something I'm not interested in for, 70 minutes. How would I feel about that? And maybe even just the thought of putting down the resentment might itself bring up something that you immediately, feel some emotional flash about.
Hmm.
But become aware of really what it's doing for you, and can you actually exist without it? Can it be something where it alerts you to something that needs your attention and development, like that
Hmm.
you can feel, that protection, like can you protect yourself without having to completely shut out the other person? Can you trust yourself that when it has become too much, you can say that it's too much and protect yourself and leave the situation?
It's kind of tricky, based on one okay, yeah, there's one time in particular. I don't know that there are other times where there had been this it's just like house business type of thing. Sort of, it's not even really fully house business. It's kind of tangential to house business, and it's something that it exists only as a hypothetical and may never be anything more than a hypothetical, but it's something that had come up 3 or 4 times, and when they brought it up, they would go on for 15, 20 minutes repeating the same things over and over. It's like,
Uh,
not out loud, but in my mind, yeah, I know you just said that. This is now the fourth time you've said it. And then they'll talk and then go on about it. And they keep repeating themselves over and over and over. And then now this is the third or fourth time that this exact situation has played out. And so I was walking across the yard to get to my car because I'd parked, we have to park behind each other in the driveway here. So instead of having to try to get my car out, I just parked in the house next door is empty.
mm,
And so I was walking as this was happening. I stopped for a minute or kind of slowed down. But then when I saw where this was going, like, hey, we're doing this again. And
mm,
so I just said, I got to go, and kept walking. And they're talking at me as I'm walking away. And discovered, I forget how now, but I discovered that they'd gotten kind of been out of shape over that, because I was walking away from them while they're talking. Like,
yeah,
well, I don't know what else to do. So, it's a case of
yeah,
set a boundary or protect a preference, however we want to call that. I guess probably more
yeah,
the preference. Um, but if you do something to deal with it in a different way, then they get hurt feelings. And it's like, so, you feel kind of trapped.
it's tough with people, especially people who have, I know you've said in the past that they have, you know issues
Hmm.
that they're dealing with.
Hmm.
um
Yeah, you're right. I
we
tend to
we
lose track of that.
we're often, dealing with people as though they are at the same cognitive and, yeah,
Right.
level that we're at, and we forget. I mean, my great aunt is almost 101, and she's
Wow.
wonderful, she, her memory is not always great. So sometimes you'll be
Mhm.
having a conversation with her and she'll bring up something, and then a couple minutes later she'll ask you the same question and you answer it, and then a few
Uh,
minutes later she'll ask it again and you answer it, and she's like delighted and has, sometimes the exact same response each time, sometimes different responses each time. But we don't like you don't when it's somebody who's older, a lot of times you don't hold that against the person because you just
right.
know it's like, oh, it's just sweet. They're just, losing the memory a little bit, and you're just really open. When other people have other reasons for their uh, loss of memory or functionality, we tend to be less forgiving.
You're right.
So noting that, you know, when you look at it from the compassionate angle towards that person, what is their internal life like? This, whatever it is such a big issue for them that they have brought it up 4, 5, 6, 7 times. Don't remember apparently having brought it up 4, 5, 6, 7 times. So
Right.
their internal state is not, um, yeah,
Yeah, it's
there's
kind of a mess.
yeah, exactly. So we can also have compassion for what it's like to be them. And instead of keeping it focused on what it's like to be me having to talk with them, we can also turn it around and be like, yeah, but there, but by the grace of causes and conditions go I. That's that's there's a lot there. So that can also change the way that we deal with it. And when we are feeling, reactive and resentful and all of that, we tend to have phrasing and, the way that we act tends to be different than when we're being openly compassionate towards someone and still saying, yeah, I'm really sorry. I do have to go. We'll pick this up later, blah, blah, blah. Just the way that it comes out can be perceived differently because we're either speaking from a place of resentment and frustration or uh,
Right.
you know kindness and compassion.
Mm.
So
Well,
I would, yeah, just also offer that as a potential when you're dealing with them.
yeah, no, everything you said was were all good points, and things that I was not aware of or thinking about. The the thought that cropped up was that in that moment of feeling frustrated or put upon or whatever, however we want to describe that, was actually a moment where I had made that whole thing about a as Pernilla puts it, a me at the center of experience,
Hmm.
which is obviously a delusional basis for interacting with people in the world.
Yeah.
And it seems like there might be some benefit to be had from trying to remember to wake up from that in the moment, that, your red flag can be the contraction in the body, the sense of
Yeah.
frustration, the tightness in the face, whatever's coming
Yep.
up, and
Yep.
go, oh, hold on a minute, this is telling me something. Okay. So what does it mean if I try to set aside some sort of me at the center of all of this? How does that change things?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what is the relationship like in that moment if you're just kind of this vacant open space? How does that change the dynamic?
Yeah, well, I mean, it'd be interesting to find out. And just because you're in a vacant open space doesn't mean that you can't, because, surely there will be, as you've said, the mind has its, how is it you've said it before? This isn't what you said, but it's this gist of it, that the mind has its conditioning.
Mhm.
It's all of its processes that are still going to play out that have been conditioned
Yep.
in. And so in that moment, even as vacant open space, surely there's going to be that um, reaction of, okay, I need to go, or, this has been going on for a long time and it really isn't about anything. And coming from that place, it can be, because I know this has happened to me in the past. I remember one time, some years back when um, I was doing I think it was the first time I was doing the Finders course, and we would meet on Sundays and do these exercises. And I left that group meeting feeling very light, feeling like vacant,
Mm.
open space,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
And I walked out into the house, and we had, I think, a friend of Susanna's over, or maybe her niece, and Susanna and Tuesday and myself. And Tuesday was in a horrible mood and was having a
Mm.
tantrum. And there was no thought involved. It was really just more kind of following what the moment presented, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I walked over to Tuesday and I started joking with her. And
Mm.
again, no thought. It was just more of a
Yep.
sense of what the next thing is to do. And I started joking with her and playing with her and did it in such a way that it got past her defenses and she started
Mm.
laughing and she started lightening up. And in less than 5 minutes, she's laughing and joking. And instead of being stuck there because she was having a tantrum, we were able to, because they were waiting for me so we could go and do something, we were able
Yeah.
to all go and get in the car and go do what we needed to do.
Yeah.
And I have never forgotten that because it showed me very clearly by way of actual lived experience that you can turn things around if you're doing it from a place that is not mired in the story of me.
Absolutely. And that's the whole point is that like you started that by saying that, the mind has its own habitual conditioned responses, but
Hmm.
it's you're if you are in that moment in dialogue with somebody as open vacant space,
Hmm.
the things internally which the mind is usually habitually reacting to are not there. The
Yeah.
things that they usually react to are the resistance that you feel physically in the body. The so
Mm.
so you start to tighten up when somebody's talking to you and you want to get away and you start to feel this tension, and then there's the self-talk or self-images or whatever of I really want to go over there and do that thing. I really want to get away. Oh my God, they're still talking, blah, blah, blah. And all of that self stuff happens. And all of those thoughts then have those add-on reactivity thoughts where you start blaming the other person and complaining about the other person. And that's where the whole situation turns into resentment. And they do this all the time. And oh my God, I've heard this story. And right. So that's build up, build up, build up. None of that would have an ability to start if you were just truly there as vacant empty space with the other person talking into the void. There's no issue, right? The resentment, the thoughts, the habitual responses to stuff are to our resistance to the moment.
Right.
When you were with Tuesday, back in those days, you came out, you didn't have that internal resistance to what was going on. You were able to
Mhm.
flow into it from a kind, joking, lighthearted manner. That's the proof that the conditioned responses are only responses to certain conditions, right? You have different conditioned responses to other conditions. The ones that cause all of the resentment and the anger and negative behaviors are ones that are conditioned to negative states in the body, uncomfortable states in the body,
Huh.
uncomfortable thought patterns. If you're not engaging with uncomfortable thought patterns and uncomfortable sensations in the body, then those are not the habitual responses that come up. Instead, you have the lighthearted, joking, easygoing ones because that's what comes up when the body is in a state of ease and relaxation.
Well, even in that moment, there was still the recognition of the fact that Tuesday was in a bad mood and that that's
Hmm.
the kind of thing that, she was having a tantrum and that's the kind of thing that, um, well, that it would be preferable if she wasn't having that and that there are people waiting to go somewhere. And so there was a recognition of the fact that this really wasn't the ideal or optimal state. And but you're right about everything else. And to go to the other example, I could be outside and that whole situation I described starts,
Yeah.
and um, it say this time of year I'm outside, it's hot, you know, probably pretty good chance that something in the mind is going to go, it's freaking hot, let's go inside. So
Uh,
that's going to pop up. And then, on the heels of that is going to be, okay, well, I need to go inside. So in other words, you can still have those kinds of responses about, um, I don't know what else to call it, but liking or disliking, or, that this is not the preferred condition, and then do something to go ahead and extract yourself from it,
yeah,
without it being turned into this whole internal diatribe about everything that's wrong with it.
no. And again, being out in the heat where, if it's potentially dangerously hot out, that's a reasonable thing to, that's one of those potentially injurious things that it is makes sense to go inside. I just wanted to quickly on the thing about, with Tuesday when she was having the tantrum,
Hmm.
um, you had even though you were aware that the situation was not optimal, it sounds
Hmm.
like your internal state, though, having come out of that thing beforehand, was where you had a how do I put that? A more the word has left the building.
Lighthearted?
No, skillful. It was a more
Yes.
skillful uh way of interacting with the moment and addressing the moment, as opposed to if you had, just been in like a traffic jam and you just came home and, had barely almost got hit by somebody, and, you just got home and you're all anxious, and then she's having a tantrum on the floor and you got to get out. Your reaction in that situation would have been completely different, even though
Yeah.
the external circumstances would have been the same.
Good point.
So it's really where you are in you coming into the circumstance that changes your reaction to the circumstance.
I see.
Right.
Well, and not that it's important to mention, but I think it's kind of curious talking about our the mind has its processes, because um, I tend to default to humor and making jokes about things. Um, and so it was interesting that I walked out into the room and immediately saw what was going on and immediately went to dealing with it by way of humor.
Mm. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Which is again, it's one of those things where a lot of kids develop it as a protective mechanism also, because
yep.
nothing diffuses an unsafe situation like making people laugh.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of comedians had such fucked up upbringings.
It's funny you should say that, because I've been listening to a guy who does he does a lot of very deep, exhaustive research into the life of people like Robin Williams, Andy Kaufman, Steve Martin, as well as other celebrities. But I've been watching mainly comedians, and
Yeah.
that's one thing I've noticed in the last, I guess it's been about maybe 6 weeks or so now that I've been watching this guy,
Nice.
and every one of them, to a person, has had really screwed up upbringings.
Yeah. 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 Thankfully, they adapted in a way that gave them a skill that had some utility outside of those circumstances as well. And they were able
Yeah,
to craft it into a career. But a lot of other people, they just have much less skillful adaptations, and you end up, you know, having
yeah,
much
like some
harder
of these other
lives.
celebrities.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
um, the one I've been listening to recently and I'm almost done with, assuming there's not a third part, was Jerry Lewis.
Okay.
And I mean, yeah, it was somewhat. I mean, it did lead him into a path that he had a productive and lucrative career, but it didn't change the fact that his life from childhood all the way through the peak of his career and beyond was really a screwed up mess.
Mm.
You know?
Yeah, so much of that out there.
Yes, there
And,
is.
and when those are the celebrities, how much more so the everyman? Just the everyday person has such a messed up life.
Hmm.
It's it, it Yeah, that could be a whole tangent, but
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
it's just it's so weird to be in 2026 and see that lives of the majority of people around the world are just still awful.
Hmm.
You know, it's it's
Yeah.
it's
And I could be wrong about this, but it seems like from where I'm sitting, it seems like that the more westernized a country is, the more people's lives are like that.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
either
There's
westernized or living under the shadow of it. I think of these cultures that are centuries old, and they have a way of life that works for them, and they're in balance with the world and the environment they live in. But they've got, say, oil companies or development companies
yeah,
breathing down their neck, and so now everything's beginning to crumble.
yeah,
And it's
yeah,
not because there's something wrong with the way that their society has evolved and adapted, that they would be fine left to their own devices, but you know, under the
yeah,
shadow of a modern world, all that begins to fall apart.
yeah.
Uh, but
That's really wild.
anyway, oh, there was, well, I don't know if it'll come back to me. There was something in all of that that I wanted to touch on, and
Sorry.
I've lost it, which is fine. It's not a big deal. But what I was going to suggest is, because we've already been at it 2 hours here. Not,
Yeah,
I don't know if it's necessarily a good idea to start it now, but I was hoping that what we could do is the next time we meet to talk, we can just go ahead and mark that off as officially, for all intents and purposes, beginning to really dig into Fetter Six,
yeah, yeah,
because we never
yeah.
have really done
Absolutely.
that. We've touched on it
Yeah, we've
here
done
and
some.
there,
That's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'd love
but
to
I,
dig
I
into some of
really
this stuff.
Yeah, I really think that would
Yeah,
be a great idea. I mean, obviously, it's the next step in the process. It
yeah,
would obviously be, I think, very beneficial for me, but I also think that everyone who tunes into these, it would be nice for them to have a video where they can go, okay, well, here we go, Fetter Six, once and for all, officially, you know,
yeah.
no ifs, ands, or
Begun.
buts. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I would love that. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's such a fun one.
and
And it does tie into what we've been talking about here.
how so?
Well, with the whole the creation of everything out of the mind. The more we start to explore our senses and the more we start to play around and question the way things really are, the more it just becomes clear that this is I think virtual reality is the closest metaphor that we have for it at this point. Yeah, it's really like just we're living in a synthesized display.
Well,
The
when you consider,
ramifications of it. Yeah, sorry, it was just that the ramifications of that undermine our belief in everything else. It's like the linchpin that holds everything together. Because you're whether it's your interactions with other people, your beliefs about, the whole bubble of reality of how they are or they're not, the sense of self that seems to be in the middle of it, the beliefs about knowing anything else in the world. I mean, all of that is a linchpin, is held together by the linchpin of that idea that anything I perceive right now is real and really the way that I think it is. And when you pull that out, I mean, the entire edifice just collapses. There's nothing there's nothing there that we can definitively believe or expect is true or real or predictable or anything. And obviously, we then have to come back to our daily lives and just kind of pretend like everything is, the way that it always was, and expect that things are going to work the way that the computer is going to work the way that it did and all of that. But like fundamentally, there's also this constant underlying acknowledgement that none of this is really the way that I think it is.
right? And it's a matter of getting that internalized to the point that it becomes, to some degree or another, I guess, kind of intuitive or instinctive, because that's an idea that is not new to me. I've mentioned Robert Anton Wilson before, and
Yeah,
uh, I think it's his book Quantum Psychology is all about this. I mean, you
yeah,
could if you wanted to, you could call his that book um, a textbook for Fetter Six.
That's
I
awesome.
mean, it really is about this very thing about how the nervous system is, at the heart of interpreting the signals that we get from a supposed out there,
Yeah,
and that it's all a big gamble. And you don't know that what your nervous system is telling you is accurate because you don't know that it interpreted it correctly.
yeah,
Talking about
yeah,
the example you gave earlier, he gives an example in the book of a place that he drove past about once a week for a number of years. And for the longest time, he saw the sign on this place as half gay cleaners. And he always kind of wondered about that half gay cleaners. And then one day he was driving back home and passed it and saw that it was in fact half day cleaners. And it really floored him that he had seen this sign
yeah,
week after week for years, and it was only then that his brain correctly interpreted the
yeah,
symbols and gave him an accurate representation of what was quote out there.
yeah. It's so funny. It's so
Or
funny.
I even had one this morning when I was getting ready prior to meeting with you. I was getting water out of the water. There's a big water filtration device, and it has one of those, kind of like the big metal things you see like at um, picnics and churches and sometimes in offices where it has the spigot, the little plastic spigot, and you press down or you can lift up. And I'd lifted it up, and the top line was reflecting light in the kitchen. And the way that the light was in the kitchen, it was just that top line, and everything else behind it was kind of dark. And so my mind saw it as a person's hair extending out from my finger and
That's
staying
funny.
there rigidly straight in open space.
Yeah,
And at first glance, I my brain just took it as, oh, that's a human hair. And then after I looked away, I went, what would that be doing there? And so I looked back because I hadn't flipped the spigot back down. And so I looked back down and I saw that is that fine line of the edge of that lever for the spigot
yeah,
reflecting a light. But it really was in that moment. It truly was taken as and believed to be a human hair extending out from my finger out into open space.
exactly. Exactly.
Uh, and I don't know what it is about this house. I have these kinds of things happen probably at least every other day here where I'll see something and I'll, what the heck? And then I'll look and I'm like, oh, it's that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this place is kind of a crash course in that sort of thing.
I think it's also, I mean, this might be totally wrong, but I suspect it's probably because uh, it's less new now than it was, but it's still a relatively new environment. Probably less of that in the house that you were in for so many years.
Yeah,
And
10
so,
years in that house.
yeah, exactly. So you start to adapt to, the brain is just like, yeah, I know what that is. That's been there.
Uh,
It's funny because like I mean, being, in this house, I've lived here my entire life, and there are so many times that Pernilla will like change something. She'll put something someplace or do something, and I just
uh,
won't see it because like it wasn't there for the first 40 years plus years that I've lived here, and so it's still not there until somehow the attention is brought to it in some way. It's like, oh yeah, completely missed that. So she's always doing changing something or putting something around, and I just don't see it. So it's
that's
like
that's funny.
yeah, it's not in the expected playbook of what this house is supposed to contain, so it just doesn't exist.
Well, I've got kind of a version of that, and I do have to qualify because you said this earlier, and I'm not saying anything about your particular take on it. I
Yeah,
mean, I'm leaving that open to interpretation because I know you're a much more open-minded person than most people. But when you say woo, for most people
yeah,
that's derogative or derisive,
yeah, yeah,
and um,
yeah,
I I I really kind of bristle at that because I have a lifetime of really bizarre experiences, and many of
yeah,
them were shared either by 1 to 5 family members
yeah,
or other people who were present for it.
yeah,
So I've seen a lot of stuff that really is. I mean, people would just call it woo, but
yeah.
when it comes to this house, there have been in the short time I've been here, there have been a couple of things that have happened, and I've reported them to Nicole, and Nicole's comment has been, "Well, weird things happen in this house."
Mm, yeah.
But I don't know if that was the case or not the other day because this I had
Oh,
behind
uh,
over here
it
underneath.
blurted out. If you put it in front of
Oh,
your face, oh,
uh,
oh, the pedal, nice.
Yeah.
Amazing.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that's how that worked.
Yeah.
It was you can kind of see it blurred out behind me. There's that white thing that's a lamp,
Yeah.
and that's actually sitting on a piano.
Oh, cool.
And the top is closed to the piano, so the keys are
Yeah.
covered. And I had it sitting there. And then when I came back to look for it a while later, it wasn't there. And my brain has been so addled from the caffeine withdrawals that even though I checked there when I was looking for it,
Yeah.
and I looked there at least four times, and it was never there. And I looked everywhere else because I've only been setting it in one of about three or four places.
Yeah.
And in all of those places, then I looked everywhere else it might possibly be. I went and looked back on the porch. It was nowhere. Then I gave up on it. I figured, okay, it's been stolen. I'm just going to have to go to plan B. And
Yeah.
then the next morning, I was getting up and I was doing something, and I happened to glance over there at the base of the lamp where I thought I'd set it, and there it was.
It's so crazy.
And the only thing
It's
I could
so
think
weird.
was either it goes to Nicole's weird things happen in this house, or
Yeah.
my mind is so addled from the caffeine detox that it was there and my brain just did not
Yeah.
process. And the fact that that's even a possibility to
Yeah.
me seems hugely significant. Do we have to
Yeah.
accept the fact that our brains, there's something that's quote out there
Yeah.
and we're just not receiving those signals?
No, not at all. Not at all. It's so fascinating. And the more we learn about, um, the other wavelengths of light and frequencies of sound and all these things that we just don't have any ability to see, and the animals that have the like can magnetically sense the North Pole, and the like like dogs are one that they will align themselves, like, so it's a weird phenomenon. Apparently not all dogs do this, but a lot of them do,
Huh?
that they align themselves in, I think it's the direction of like facing north when they poop. So they'll like turn, and you'll see them like they pivot, and it's so there are a lot, and like birds who migrate like super long distances. A lot of that is that they're
Right.
able to pick up the um the magnetic uh
Orientation.
yeah, field orientation. Yeah, and so like it's something that heard some people say we kind of have it, but I don't think we do. Um, but it's like there are senses that we just don't have access to that other animals do. So
Huh.
we have this idea that like this is my world and I understand it all and I'm perceiving it all, and it could not be further from the truth. There are so many other things that other animals are able to perceive that we just don't. And those are just those animals. It's like it's just what's adaptably relevant. Who knows what else is out there that no other animal or insect is able to pick up because it's just not on their you know needs for adaptation. I mean, we don't know, right? So it's like, yeah, again, it comes back to just the humility of our own experience being a very uniquely human experience in a very limited, human body with all of its sense faculties that are uh, so fallible in so many ways.
Hmm.
My eyes are not good, and they do wonderful things. Um, yeah, it's just it we know somebody who they have macular degeneration, and basically everywhere they look they see like patterns of like fabrics and stuff, like cheetah patterns on stuff, and like all sorts of weird, um
Huh.
just not there. It's just like a hallucination, but yeah, really, really strange. So, but super convincing. So,
Well, it makes me think of when I was actively or regularly using psychedelics. And, my approach to it was sort of the antithesis of the whole microdose revolution that's been going on. It's like,
okay, yeah,
you're either jumping into the deep end of the pool or it's not worth your time.
yeah,
And I can recount all kinds of experiences of things that presented themselves that seemed absolutely real and present in space time. But without the aid of that chemical, it was not there.
nope, nope.
So,
And yeah, yeah. it's such a fascinating, such a fascinating topic to explore because it is. I mean, I understand why we have the conviction that we do in our experience being correct because it's the only thing we have access to, and it's helpful.
Well, plus
Um,
think how many times we actually say, well, this is in the cabinet there, or this person is
exactly.
coming over, or, all the things that happen on a daily basis
Yeah.
where we're correct or we were able to predict them accurately,
Yep.
you
Yeah.
know?
We're like correct enough. You didn't get it all, but you got like correct enough that it works.
Well, the problem is
It-
that that kind of experience creates this absolute conviction in most people.
yeah,
And,
exactly.
and there's a famous phrase from Timothy Leary where he said, "Convictions make convicts of us all."
I love that. That's really
So
good.
we wind up
Yeah.
imprisoned in a world that we don't realize how much misrepresentation and accuracy is there because we are so convinced. We have this, like fundamentalist belief in our own perception and interpretation.
Yeah.
And I mean,
Absolutely.
I'm as guilty as anyone. I mean, I might be X number of steps removed from that compared to some other person,
Yeah.
but I can tell you right now that there's a lot of that idea that we're discussing that I would like to see internalized more and get a
Hmm.
more fluid, relaxed, open sense of interpreting experience.
Yeah. 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 And it's, where I think it's important to remember is that you're always going to be interpreting the world the way that, you see it. We talk a lot in the sixth fetter stuff and all the, non-duality awakening people give a lot of importance to those kind of psychedelic things breaking apart kinds of experiences, but you can't live that way. That's not the point. Isn't to keep it that way. It's to live in the world that you currently live in, but to also realize that it is more fluid than you've been recognizing, and that it's just not the way that it really is. It's your functional display. It's very convenient for you and it works for you. That's why, it's been developed and evolution has made it the way that it is. If this didn't work for the human creature, we would have developed a different interface. We would be seeing something different. This happens to work for us. So there's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't need to change. It's just the conviction that we have in it as being representative of the way things really are instead of a representation of the way that I think it is. And that's what's really true. We think
Yeah.
the world into being the way that it is. And again, that's what leads to that humility and that willingness to be flexible and see things from other perspectives and have, you know, that greater sense of detached awareness with everything because you're no longer completely bound into the rigidity of believing that things really are the way that they are and that you really are the way that you are.
Well, that phrase that you just said, detached awareness, that has come to be more of what I'm hoping for as a result of this work and continuing to do this work over the rest of my life is more of a detached awareness as opposed to like what you said a minute ago about those more psychedelic experiences
Yeah.
because I'm not really sure that if we went, I mean, some people might point to Ramana Maharshi, but I don't even know that he was living in that kind of state. I think he was just
Yeah.
a very, I don't even know if I want to use the word deep, but you can tell from watching videos of him and reading what people said about him that he was experiencing a very detached awareness.
Yeah.
And then, I forget which sutta it is, but the Buddha talks about how his back hurts except when he's in meditation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it doesn't seem like it's about some sort of rarefied or unusual experience, day in, day out. It seems like it's more a matter of that phrase, detached awareness.
Yeah.
That seems like more what it's all kind of aiming towards.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And even going back to what I said about, I'm sorry, even
no,
that
it's
that
okay.
that incident I described with Tuesday, that was
Yeah.
detached awareness.
Yeah, exactly. You're present, but you're less identified with what's going on, and you have more resilience and more ability to act skillfully because you're not as deeply identified with the, perceived problems of the situation.
Yeah,
That makes all the difference.
yeah. And if we go back to the very first video that you and I did, I talked about the experience I had that evening in the playground when I took Tuesday
Mm,
out to the playground that afternoon. And while that was a really nice way to go about living, and that might be just a very deep type of detached awareness, I don't know. I mean, I had no problem going about my business. I mean,
yeah.
going about taking care of daily stuff was not a problem, but still, I don't know how feasible it is to remain like that day in, day out. But um, detached awareness, I mean, that actually says a lot more. That some people might hear that and think that, wow, that's really kind of the short end of the stick. I'm like,
No,
no, not necessarily.
I don't think so. No,
Yeah.
no. And everybody gets to have different experiences, and I really do believe that the kind of awakening that you have depends on the practices that you're doing. It depends on the
Mm,
biological changes in the brain. It depends on the proclivity and the ability of this particular biological organism, because everything is mitigated by that. So some people do certain practices that, turn down certain regions of the brain and up, turn up or create more connections in other regions. And depending on the proclivities, depending on the philosophical belief system that underpins everything, it gives you different interpretations of an experience. So your experience is different. Um, and I think that's why we have so many people that are very convinced about the um, more religious and Advaita side of things, because if you come in with an experience or come in with a belief system to the practice, and then you have an experience that seems to reflect what was in that belief system, it just
mhm.
reinforces itself. There's no question, no need to question that. Just like when people who are very Christian and they go to church and they have an experience that they're told is the Holy Spirit, and then they have this, conviction that yes, this is obviously true. I just had this experience. It's because they came in with a belief, they had an experience, which had they been in a Buddhist meditation, a retreat, and had a similar experience, that would have been proof of the truth of the Buddhist doctrine that they had just been practicing and the conviction of the meditation practice that they just did. And so all of it is, again, pointing to that uh, very subjective nature of all of our experiences based on the beliefs and the conditioning that led up to it, that then whatever the stimuli is going to be interpreted differently. And everybody's proclivities are then going to enhance that in one way or another. And so we end up with all of these different things that we call awakening that have different interpretations and different hallmarks for different people because everybody's different and we all come from different backgrounds.
So confirmation bias.
Absolutely confirmation bias. Yeah. Yeah. And biological bias, that like
Hmm.
some people just have a natural proclivity that based on their hand size and their, the way that their brain happens to be structured or whatever, they tend to really excel as a pianist, whereas others are really, really good at math. And there's just, we have like biological um uh what's the word I'm looking for? Predilections, things that we're just particularly well suited for.
Right.
Um, and that holds true in this arena as well. It's just some people are really good at watching their breath for hours and hours at a time without, discursive thinking, and other people, their biology is such that that is just never going to be really a possibility for them, but they excel in some other, aspect of it. So the outcome is always going to be a product of that.
Huh. Well, it's funny that you give the examples that you did, and then I think about the fact that what you're really talking about is the whole process of waking up and the fact that, um, and of course it makes sense why it would be the way this would be this way, but that it could mean that somebody is a very skilled pianist or a chess player or something, but it also translates into what the process of unbinding will look like for a person.
Yeah, completely.
Huh.
Completely. And that's the whole thing is that awakening is as unique. There are many different versions of awakening as there are of people who are on the path trying to wake up. And that's
Yeah.
wonderful. It's wonderful that it's not a one size fits all, everybody shares the same experience kind of thing. It's great. But it where it runs into issues is when people start comparing their experience with other people and think that they're
Yeah.
not succeeding because they haven't experienced this thing that this person has talked about, or they're interpreting something differently than they interpreted something. And again, it's just the nature of the beast.
It makes me think of when I took the finder's course the first time, and in some of the literature that they gave was a piece called, I think it was 5 or 7 myths about awakening.
Okay.
And that was a real eye opener. And I cannot remember what all of them were, but it basically, it would fit in perfectly with everything you were just describing. Because, one of the things that they wanted people to understand and take away from that particular writing was that it's not the same for everyone. It's not
Yeah.
something like you said that's one size fits all. It's very different from person to person. So, okay.
But it was really good talking with you.
Yeah, it's always great
Um,
talking.
Thank you. And yeah, good luck with everything. And I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, well, I'll
All right.
talk to you in a few weeks.
Yep. Thanks, man.
All right, bye.
Bye.